Guess I'm recording. Yay! Okay, so today we're going to talk about God, our Maker, doth provides. We are finally getting some good people to America, the Pilgrims. So, okay, so the 3 month, it took them 3 months for the Mayflower to get here. And remember all the storms and all the terrible stuff that happened. Then once they get here, then they have to send a smaller ship out to our boat with about let's see how many people, 30 people to scour out the land because they don't want to dock with kids and be killed by all the Indians. So they went around looking for a place to, a good place to stay. They were attacked by Indians, which they had guns, muskets, and so they were able to run them off. But they finally found this land that was just, it's like they had it all been cleared and there was nobody on this land. And, you know, the soil was rich, it was fertile, and there was like 5 creeks really close at hand. It was perfect. So they go back and they get all the people from the ship, and when they get there, they find out that William Bradford, he's kind of one of the lead guys, his wife, I don't know whether they kind of think she might have thrown herself overboard, but she drowned. So his wife, his brand new wife, had died. So, you know, he could have he felt sorry for himself. He could have given up, but he just decided, no, I came here knowing that it was going to cost me maybe my life. And so I'm just going to keep on going. So he did. So he helped all the Pilgrims get off the boat. They called the place Plymouth. And remember their captain that didn't really like them? Well, he had really grown to love them because he realized they weren't a bunch of gentlemen Englishmen that didn't want to do anything. They had proved themselves on the boat that they weren't a bunch of babies. So he really had started liking them. They land in December. It's freezing cold. And so they're trying to set up houses. Their hands are so cold they can hardly hold the axe. But somehow, and then on top of that, they start getting sick from just being in the ocean for so long. They got scurvy, which they had been taking lemon juice. They had to drink that every single day, but they'd run out of lemon juice, so they were getting scurvy. And they started getting pneumonia and getting sick, so 6 people died in December, 8 people died in January, and then but they just kept praying. They kept praying. 2 started dying a day. It just became really, really, really bad. So by the time in February, there was like 17 deaths. In March, there was 13 more that died. So 47 people of their original number had died by the time that the fall came. I mean, this spring came. But they didn't lose their hope in the Lord, which is just amazing. They just kept praying more, and they found out that, oh, never mind. Okay, so what I want to tell you about, hold on. I want to tell you about their houses. They would make their houses out of mud, and they were usually just 2 rooms. The one room was the main room and had a fireplace and the kitchen, the whole thing. It was like Little House on the Prairie. And then they had a loft up above one of the other rooms, and I guess the other room was the parents' bedroom, and then they had a loft above it where all the kids slept. And then they had a blockhouse that was at the top of the hill, and that was it was this big building that had a flat roof and had a trap door. So you could go up on the roof, and this cannon, you could lift this cannon up, and that was their defense. So then during the week, they would have their everything happened in the blockhouse. So they would meet there, they would have their church there. The women would sit on one side, the men would sit on the other side. They, you know, and William Bradford was like their spiritual leader. But they were starving and they were dying. But in the middle of March, somebody yelled out, "Indian coming!" And they're like, "Indian coming?" So their captain was Miles Standish, and he's going, "Surely you mean Indians coming." So they all go into the big house, and they're up there and on the roof, and they're, you know, waiting. And all of a sudden, the door opens, and this one Indian walks in, and he just walks straight in. He goes, "Hello, welcome." And they're like, "What? You speak English?" And then he asked them if they had any beer. And they go, "Well, we don't have any beer, but we do have some," what did they have, brandy or something like that? They had some brandy. So he goes, "Okay, that'll do." Well, this guy, this Indian that walked in, they find out later that his name was Samoset. I don't know if you've ever heard of Samoset, but he had been an Indian, one of the Algonquins, and from Maine, and he'd been visiting for like 8 months, and he'd met this English sea captain known that the Pilgrims actually knew by reputation, and that's kind of how, well, he had a story, but that's kind of how he learned to speak English. So they asked him, "Well, can you tell us anything about the Indians around here? Because apparently this guy's really nice." And they go, "Well, yeah, you landed where the Patuxet, 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 I bet that's how it's said, used to live. And they were very hostile. They killed every white man that ever came there. And but 4 years prior to the Pilgrims getting there, a disease had hit them and killed every single one of them. So they're the people that had cleaned off the land. And the other Indians, when all of them died from this disease, they thought that the place was haunted by demons, so no other Indians would come close. So that was a big blessing for the Pilgrims. That's what kept them safe. But he told them about another Indian warrior chief that he had lived with for 8 months, and his name was Massasoit. So he was a chief that was over a bunch of other Indians, and and he was a good chief. So anyway, then he told them about the Indians that were out on the Cape that they had been attacked by. They were the Nausetts, and they hated the white men because they had met Captain Thomas Hunt years later, and he had actually tricked 7 of them by saying, "Oh, I have lots of stuff coming to my boat and I'll show you what we can trade with." But he actually kidnapped them, then went south and got about 5 more and took them back to Spain and sold them into slavery. So they did not like white people. But let's see. So he ended up spending the night with them, and which they watched him all night to see if he was going to attack them, but he didn't. And they gave him some knives and a bracelet and some rings, and to take to as a gift to Massasoit, so they could make friends with him. So he leaves and goes to Massasoit, and comes back the next Thursday, but he's got another Indian with him, and this Indian had been a Patuxet, you know, one of the bad ones, but his name was Squanto, and I know you've heard of Squanto. He was a gift of God, sent there. He'd been taken by George Weymouth all the way to England. He'd been kidnapped, and he had to stay there for years, but while he was there, he met Captain John Smith, and he brought him back to the United States. So, I mean, yes, the United States, which was not called the United States then. But anyway, but he had sailed with Captain Thomas Hunt, and he okay, I just want to read this and get this right. Who was under Captain Smith's leadership, but as soon as Captain Smith parted, they were in different boats. He captured 20 of the Potsets, and including Squanto, took them to Spain and sold them for 20 pounds apiece. And he had to stay there for years. Let's see, how long did he stay there? But in England, he learned about Jesus. So he came back to Plymouth years later, and now when he got back, he realized that all of his family had been killed, all of them. So nobody was left, and he was just devastated. He ended up going and finding Massasoit, who took him in, and he was just very depressed, just had lost his reason for living, and because all of his people were dead. But when Samoset came and said, hey, there's a group of really friendly people from England, and they have landed, and they do not know how to live, and if we don't help them, they're going to starve to death. And so he agreed to go with Samoset and meet them. So they made a peace treaty that would last for 40 years. And Squanto, when he met the Pilgrims, he realized, this is my reason for living. They are now living where my family used to live, and God must have sent them. So he taught them how to catch eels, which they would go to the mud and they would squish the mud, and up would pop these eels, and they would catch them with their bare hands. And they tasted really good. So he taught them how to do that. And then he taught them how to plant corn the Indian way, which would be to take like 4 or 5 seeds of corn, put it in a circle, and then get 3 fish and do it like a pie. Put 1 fish here, 1 fish here, and 1 fish here, and just lay them on the ground, let them decompose for 2 weeks, and you had to watch them, or the wolves would come eat them, and they would ferment and fertilize the ground, and those corn would grow really well. So he taught them how to do that, and they ended up having 20 full acres of corn and began to flourish, because these people were not like the English people who came before at Jamestown, who were afraid to work. He also taught them how to stalk deer, how to plant pumpkins with their corn, how to refine maple syrup and make from the maple trees, and to discern whether the herbs were poisonous or whether they were good, whether they were for eating or whether they were for medicine, how to find the best berries. He just taught them how to survive. Then he taught them how to catch beavers, because the pelts of the beavers were very in high demand in New England, and they could sell them and make money and trade them for stuff that they needed in England. So he was an absolute godsend. The governor of Plymouth was Governor Carver, but he had a cerebral hemorrhage and died. So William Bradford became the next governor, and every year they would vote him back in. And so for the next 36 years of his life, except for 5 of those years where he said, I cannot be your governor this year, he was their governor. He was their governor of choice. So he was actually really, really good and very loved. So after Carver, the first governor, died, the captain that had brought them over there, that didn't like them at first and ended up loving them, he had to go back to England, because he had to go back and check in with his company, because they had sent him. So he goes back and he begs them to come, because he's afraid that if he leaves them, they won't live. But none of them wanted to leave. They had found their home, and they just were not afraid of hardships. So that winter, or that May, they, I mean, God just always knows how to, encourage and send good things. Well, two of the people's husbands and wives had died. So Edward Winslow's wife had died in that sickness, and Susanna White's husband had died, and they decided to marry. So they have this beautiful wedding, and it's just a great fun time. They learn how to, they start trading with the Indians, thanks to Squanto and Samoset, and then October, they decide to have a Thanksgiving, and they invite Samoset to their Thanksgiving, and they have enough food, food to feed him. Well, he comes and he brings 90 Indians with him, and they're like, oh my goodness. So they just pray that God will provide. And they came a day early with 91 people now they have to feed for this party. Well, the Indians, they did not come empty-handed. They brought 5 deer that had already been dressed and ready to cook. They brought dozens of fat turkeys and wild turkeys, and they taught the pilgrims how to make these hoe cakes, which I guess were like pancakes, and tasty pudding out of cornmeal and maple syrup. And then they taught them how to make popcorn. Take the popcorns and heat them. So in turn, the pilgrims taught them they had all these vegetables from their gardens, and they taught them how to cook the vegetables, and they taught them how to take all the berries that the Indians had brought them, and make blueberry and apple and cherry pies. And so they had a great celebration that lasted for several days. They had they did shooting contests with their guns and their bows. They had foot races and wrestling, and they Captain Standish led them in military drills. They just played for 3 days, and then the Indians left. And so by November, so that was October, November, they had been there a full year. And this ship comes in called the Fortune, and instead of bringing them supplies, they bring them more people. They brought them 35 more people. And they brought nothing with them. No clothing, no tools, no provisions, no bedding, no anything. So that winter, they had to go on half rations, which was hardly anything, just to help these people that had just come. Then they get news back from England that their person there that had sent them, his name was Weston, he was mad that the Mayflower came back with no provisions, and that he said, you have got to start sending back something, because the whole thing was that we send you and you send us back stuff, like gold. That's what they really wanted. But so they go, okay, we will next time. But one of the people that came was Cushman, and I don't know if you remember him, but he was on the original boat that when they got delayed 2 weeks, he decided to stay, and he came with them. And he came wanting them to sign this agreement that would just put them in further bondage to the adventurers, and they didn't want to do that. But he preached this unbelievable sermon about being willful and prideful, and having self-love, and just to condemn them for what little they had. They were the most selfless people on the planet, and he's just piling all this condemnation on them so they'll sign this treaty. And they did. And this treaty was so unfair. It was so unfair. They could have gotten out of it because it was so wrong. But it made them owe the company all this money to pay for them their voyage there, and the interest rates were 30 to 50%. They had to sell their homes, back home, they had to do everything they could to pay it, but they were bound and determined to pay every single cent. They ended up paying on a, all right, listen to this, on a debt of $1,800, they paid back $20,000. So it was so wrong. But they would rather just be fair and be done with them. So they just wanted to do what was right before the Lord, even if they were mistreated. Then that winter of 1621 to 1622 was a really starving time. Their daily rations were 5 kernels of corn apiece, 5 kernels of corn. How they lived on this, it was impossible, but not one of them died. That is just the providence of God and God's blessing upon these people. And then a ship came back unexpectedly, and it didn't bring them food, but it brought them things they could trade. It brought them like beads and knives and trinkets, and see, the Indians loved all this kind of stuff, so they could trade with the Indians and make have enough corn and everything to last them. So April, it's time to plant corn again, and then there was no rain. There was no rain for months, and it was a what do they call it? Hold on. Well, anyway, they have a famine. There's no food, there's no rain. And then they just started crying out to the Lord and asking the Lord to do something. The Indians were doing their rain dances, but they just prayed and prayed, and they fasted, and they decided, God, what is going on? What do we need to do? And they realized that they were just thinking about themselves, they and their own little family, and they needed to think about the whole group. And so they repented, and God sent rain for 14 days. It revived all that dead, decayed corn and the other fruits. And the Indians, it was such a testimony to them. They were just astonished because they had never seen anything like that. The yield that year was so abundant that the Pilgrims ended up having more than they needed. They were able to trade that winter with the Northern Indians, and enough to grow the next season. So they had their second day of Thanksgiving, and they invited Massasoit again. This time he brought his wife and 120 braves. But fortunately, they brought enough. They brought venison and turkey again, and they had another wonderful Thanksgiving. So one of the adventurers is the name of their company, and he came to visit them, and this was his report. He goes, after our arrival in New England, we found all our plantation in good health, and neither man, woman, or child was sick. In this plantation is about 20 houses, 4 or 5 of which are very pleasant, and the rest, as time will serve, shall be made better. The fishing, that is, in our country, indeed, is beyond belief. In 1 hour we got 100 cod. And now to say somewhat of the great cheer we had at the governor's marriage. We had about 20 tasty venison, besides others, pieces of roasted venison, and other such good cheer in such quantities that I wish you some of our share. I wish you could have had some. For here we have the best grapes you've ever seen, and the biggest, and different sorts of plums and nuts, 6 goats, about 50 hogs and pigs, and different kind of hens, and a better country was never seen or heard of, for there were a multitude of God's blessing. So what he neglected to say was that they put a plate in front of everybody's great bountiful plate. They put a plate of 5 kernels just so they wouldn't forget what God had done for them. So that concludes our 9th lesson. But just the blessing of God on people that were willing to persevere and trust God and go through hard times. It's just amazing. This is the heritage of America. So God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Okay, bye.